Thank you for the introduction. Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to describe this morning just the basics principles that we need to make some images of X nuclei or proton X nuclei with MRI. I have nothing to declare. So this is just the outline of my presentation. I'm just going to give you the basics of X nuclei NMR in vivo, what we need to do to detect a signal. Then I'm going to focus on a few nuclei like sodium, phosphorus, and oxygen. Then a very short description of some more exotic nuclei that people have been explored already, like chlorine, potassium, lithium. Then give some limitation on prospect of the techniques and a little summary. So why do we want to do X nuclei? The goal is to, proton imaging gives very nice structural information on the tissues, but we miss a lot of metabolic information. So maybe we can use some other nuclei than proton to detect this with MRI. And we can try to do it like in a non-invasive way, different compared to PET, for example. We don't need to inject radio tracers. And if possible, let's try to be quantitative. And the goal would be to help for the diagnosis and prognosis of pathologies and to get information related to ion homeostasis and cell integrity, like in neurodegeneration or ischemia, or to get some new information about tumor malignancy. And I think it would be very interesting too to help monitor the therapy over like a short term after application of the therapy in chemotherapy, in breast cancer, radiotherapy in brain, or to help drug development. So this is just a little diagram to explain like what kind of information can we get on the cellular energy metabolism with the different nuclei. So you can see the different colors here. Oh, sorry. I don't know if the pointer. So in blue, you're going to see some sodium signal. In green, it's going to be the phosphorus. In purple, oxygen 17. In proton or orange, it's going to be in red or orange, it's going to be the proton spectroscopy or MRI. And gold is going to be some carbon 13 information. So for example, in this part of the cell is going to be the production of ATP, and this one is going to show the consumption of ATP, of energy in the cells. So healthy cells in general need some glucose that's going to penetrate the cells through the transporter. And it can be synthesized into pyruvate through glycolysis to produce 2 ATP molecules. And in presence of oxygen, the pyruvate is going to penetrate the mitochondria to go to the Krebs cycles to produce a lot of ATP, about 30 to 34 ATP. So it's a very efficient mechanism to produce ATP from glucose and oxygen. And this, you're going to have some residual of some products of water. The creatine and phosphocreatine are going to be involved too in the process. And in case of absence of oxygen, so this glycolysis is going to be the main source of energy, which is very inefficient, and you're going to have production of lactate. And in tumors, for example, even in presence of oxygen, the cell is going to prefer to produce some lactate and going to kind of barely use this oxidative phosphorylation mechanism. It's called the Warburg effect, and it's going to produce a little bit more of ATP, but it's less efficient. And you see here the ATP is going to be used by the sodium-potassium pump or the calcium pump to pump out the excess of sodium or calcium to maintain a constant gradient between the intra and extracellular compartments. So all this information, if you have a loss of ATP or less of production of ATP in the cells, you're going to see an increase of sodium inside the cells, for example, that you can detect with sodium MRI, or you can detect like the change in phosphocreatine or ATP or PI, or inorganic phosphate or ADP with phosphorus, phosphorus imaging. And you have some like a lot of information that we cannot get with proton imaging, but maybe with X nuclei. So first, what do we need to detect this nuclei? We need a spin which is different from 0. We need some high natural abundance, if possible, of the isotope and some presence in the body. So your body is about 62% made of hydrogen nuclei. Then the second most important one is the oxygen, but unfortunately, oxygen 16, the most abundant one, is not detectable with NMR. But oxygen 17 only represents 0.37% of the whole content, so it's not much signal. Phosphorus is pretty abundant in the body, but most of it is in the bones, and but we can still detect some in the cells. So then the second most easiest detectable nucleus in the body would be the sodium, which has a very small concentration, but still detectable. And this is just a diagram of the receptivity, so just based on the magnetic properties of the spins, on their gyromagnetic ratio. You can calculate what kind of signal you're going to detect compared to proton if you have the same amount of nuclei, for example, in the sample. So on the x-axis, you have the frequency for 1 Tesla magnet, and on the y-axis is just going to be the signal relative to proton. So proton is going to be 1, and you see sodium is going to be like, frequency is going to be 4 times lower, and only 10% of the protons. So you lose a lot of signal just because of the magnetic properties, like it's a spin 3/2, and the gamma is like 25% almost of the one of the proton. The phosphorus, it's a spin 1/2 like proton, but the gamma is a little bit higher. So and the receptivity is going to be about 6% of the proton. On oxygen 17, it's a spin 5/2, so it's quadrupolar nucleus too. The gamma is very low, and it's negative, so it's going to rotate in the other direction. And the receptivity is very, very small, 0.001%. And then if you take into account the abundance, the natural abundance, and how much you have some nuclei in the body. So sodium is the 23 is the 100% abundance, and you have around in a few tenths of millimolar in the brain and muscles. So you can expect a signal in brain, for example, about 20,000 times smaller than proton. For phosphorus, it's all the same, 100%, and the metabolites in the brain or muscle in the body, it's about a few millimolar, so it's very small. So you can expect a signal which is about 80,000 times smaller than proton. And oxygen 17 is 0.037% natural abundance, very low, but it's going to be present in the water, so you have a very high concentration. But still, the signal is going to be about 400 million times smaller than a proton. So you're going to have to compensate for this with your detection. And this is just a little representation. For example, if you assume that the proton signal in the brain is the Empire State Building, the sodium one is going to be a little penny next to the Empire here. The phosphorus is going to be like a little ant. The chlorine is going to be the size of a grain of salt. The potassium is going to be the size of a dust mite. And the oxygen 17 is going to be about 1 micrometer. It's the size of a bacteria, if you imagine next to the Empire here. So now I'm going to focus on sodium imaging, which is a little bit my specialty. So sodium is present inside and outside the cells in different concentration. Like you have very high concentration of sodium outside the cell, about 140 millimolar, which is the same as for chlorine, and very small concentration, like about 10-fold difference inside the cell, about 15 millimolar. And this gradient is very important for the good health of the tissues. And this is maintained by the sodium-potassium pump, which uses a lot of ATP. About 50% of the ATP in the cells or in the brain is used by this sodium-potassium pump to pump out the sodium and to pump in the potassium. So if you have any impairment in this cell, in this pump, for some injuries or some disease, some dysregulation, you can expect a large increase of sodium inside the cells that could be characteristic of some impairment. So sodium is a spin 3/2, so it's got 4 energy levels, which is different from proton. And the main source of the signal is going to be ions, just simple ions. And so since you got a spin 3/2, it's going to have a quadrupolar moment, which is going to interact very strongly with the surroundings electric field gradients around them. So this quadrupolar interaction is going to be the main relaxation process for the sodium in the body, and it's going to result in a bi-exponential T1 and T2. In T1 in vivo is still mono-exponential, like a few tenths of milliseconds, and we're going to have a very short T2, about 1 millisecond, and T2 long, which is a bit longer, about 15 milliseconds. And in general, T2 is short, represents about 60% of the signal. So we're going to need some very short T sequence to be able to detect as much signal as possible. And depending on the environment of the sodium ions, you can have some different kind of spectra. So if you're in a solid environment, you can for one spin, you can still detect, like, you can have some 3 transitions on 3 peaks, but which is pretty rare in a body. On a powder, you can have some kind of distribution of peaks. So in general, in soft tissues or in liquid, like in CSF or in like edema, you're going to have more one peak. The 3 peaks are coalescing in the center. But you're still going to have some bi-exponential relaxation in that case, for example. So you have to take this into account for your quantification. So in general, the technique to represent the signal for the spin 3-half is to use these spherical tensor, irreducible spherical tensor operators, which so the T10 is going to be your IZ, your longitudinal magnetization, and T1 minus 1 or plus 1 is going to represent the transverse magnetization. For spin 1-half for proton, you're going to have only these 3 parameters, but for spin 3-half, you're going to have the apparition of these parameters, like some double, triple quantum coherences of different rank that can be created and evolve during your sequence, during the pulse and relaxation, and they're all going to influence your signal. And this evolution can depend on the environment of the ions. So in more like restricted environment, you're going to have some more triple quantum coherences or double quantum coherences that can give you information about the environment of the ions. So this is just one slide to show the formalism to describe the signal that we can use for simulation, for example. So we use like the density operator formalism that represents the probability of transition between the different energy levels. And you can decompose this density operator in spherical tensors with the different weights, complex weights. And the master equation to describe the evolution of the spins is described with Hamiltonians and a relaxation operator. So Hamiltonians represent all your B0 field, your B1 field, if you have some residual quadrupolar anisotropy in a quadrupolar interaction. And the relaxation term, sorry, I lose it. It's going to depend on the spectral density of your spins and the quadrupolar interaction between them and their environment. And to simulate some observable, you can just take the trace of this operator, the one you want, multiplied by the density operator. And so in general, when you do sodium imaging, you detect the average signal from both intra and extracellular sodium, but the extracellular sodium is not going to change much in disease, so you want to be able to suppress this signal to be more sensitive to intracellular sodium. So there are different methods that can be used, like shift reagent is the most efficient. When you inject lanthanide chelates in the cells, they're going to stay outside the cells, so it's going to shift the signal of your extracellular sodium. So you can be able to select the intracellular signal, but this is toxic, so you cannot use it in humans. Diffusion will be another method. They have different motional properties inside and outside the cells, but for this you need very strong gradients and ultra short EE, so it's impractical in vivo. So the most used technique in general in the field is to use simple inversion recovery, which is based on the T1, assuming that the T1 is different intra and extracellular. And the shorter T1 comes mostly from intracellular sodium. And you can use these sequences called multiple quantum filtering, which are based on a bi-exponential T2 relaxation. So T2 MQF, multiple quantum filters, is based on 3 pulses, or you can add 180 to remove some B0 inhomogeneities. So if you have 3 90 degrees here, and you select your appropriate phase cycling, you can detect, in theories, the signal only from slow motion. So people assume in general it comes mainly from intracellular sodium. And you can see the pulse is going to create these coherences, and the relaxation is going to transform them. And after the third pulse, you can create like this triple quantum coherence that's going to evolve in a single quantum coherence that you can detect with NMR. If you do the same, like 390s here, but different phase cycling, you can detect signal from both slow motion and anisotropic. So if you have anisotropy in your cells, you have like maybe in white matter or in muscles, you can detect another signal. Give you some more information. And the double quantum filter with a magic angle, so if you put these 2 pulses at 54 degrees, you should be expected to be more sensitive to only the anisotropy inside in the environment of your ions. But in that case, in most of these cases, you lose about 90% of the signal. So you start with very small signal, and you just detect only 10% of it. So this image is going to be very low resolution and take a lot of time. And the other method is just to simply use inversion recovery. So if you assume you know the T1, T2 of your different compartments, you can just adapt your inversion, the TI. And in general, you're still going to lose about 50% of the signal of the intracellular sodium, for example. So what do we need? So for sodium, we see the signal is very low, the receptivity is low. So we need high field, is better, 70 is pretty good. We need dual tune coils that are like tuned to the good frequency, and it's always nice to have the capability to have proton, like to co-register your proton images. And you need some broadband RF amplifiers installed in your scanner. From the software point of view, you want to detect the ultra-short, the signal is decaying very, very fast. You need ultra-short TE sequences. In general, we use sequences that start from the center of K-space. We use 3D radial or density-adapted 3D radial, which is more efficient in the outer K-space to be more uniform. Twisted projection imaging or FLORET, which are like a kind of, you project some spirals on cones, so you have a more uniform distribution of points in your K-space. Reconstruction is based on non-uniform FFT or 3D regridding. And in general, images about a few millimeter isotropic resolution, 2 to 5, and now you can get some decent images in about 5 minutes on a 70 scanner. This is just an example of K-spaces. We get like the 3D radial, we start from the center of K-space and we do projections. On the FLORET or 3D cones or twisted projection imaging, you just twist your trajectory, and you can even rotate them in different orientations. This is an example from Heidelberg. So you see just the same sequence applied at 1.5, 3T and 70 on sodium in the brain. So you see a big increase for 70 is pretty, 3T is still decent, but 70 is pretty good for sodium. And see some other images from Tübingen, where they did images of sodium in the brain at 9.4 Tesla with a very nice theoretical resolution of 1.1 by 1 by 5 in 30 minutes. And you can see some very nice features already. And this is just some example of quantification that we can try to do in sodium. So if you have in your cells, in your VOC cell in the brain, you have some extracellular space, you have intracellular space in the astrocytes and in the neurons. You have some blood too and some CSF. And you can decompose this as a simple 3 compartment. This is over simple model and a 3 compartment. Intracellular sodium, where you want to measure the sodium concentration inside the cells. Extracellular, when you assume you know the concentration, about 140 millimolar outside the cell is constant, but you want to measure the volume fraction. And you always have a compartment which is where there's no sodium, like the membranes or the metabolites, where you assume that there's no sodium. And this is like a little hypothesis. So if you measure the extracellular volume fraction and intracellular sodium concentration, in normal tissue it should be about 10 to 20 millimolar. The sodium concentration, and volume fraction is about 0.2. And if you can travel in this diagram, you can get some information about loss of homeostasis, like the gradient is not working anymore, the sodium-potassium pump is impaired, or if you lose the cell viability, cells are dying in Alzheimer or traumatic brain injury, for example. So this is an example of traumatic brain injury that we got at NYU now. So in the control, you do a simple sodium, it's like 5 millimeter resolution. And the one with inversion recovery, when you suppress the fluid, and we expect to attenuate a lot the extracellular signal. This is the MPRH for comparison. And if I put this in my little 3 compartment model, we can have a map of the intracellular sodium concentration, which is pretty uniform. It gives about 15 millimolar everywhere. And this is the volume fraction, which is about 0.2 in the parenchyma. And this is a patient with after traumatic brain injury. So you already see some change of signal in the sodium images, pre-processing. You see some defects, like structural defects so in MPRH. And if you do the maps, you can see some change here. You expect a lot of, like a large increase of sodium inside the cells here in these two parts, but not here. And you see there's a lot of fluid here in this one. So this one is mostly fusion, while here we expect it's most like cells are dying. And the sodium is increasing, about 40, 50 millimolar. So this is a continuing study now. We want to do it over time, like the same patient over time. This is from Armin and Heidelberg at this time. So, a patient with a glioblastoma, and you can see, compare with a T1 GADO, the T2 weighted image, ADC proton, and you can see the full sodium and sodium with inversion recovery when you can detect like the solid part of the tumors, for example. And this is from Marseille, where they did some total sodium, so they don't quantify the intracellular, they just measure the full sodium. In a patient with multiple sclerosis, and you can already see a trend of increase of sodium in lesions, in early relapse-remitting MS or advanced, but not only in the lesions, but even in a normal appearing white matter, so you don't see anything on proton, but you see a trend here. And this is in cancer, in naive tumors, or resistant. You can see after like 11 days after injection of the tumor, you see a normal sodium in the brain, like 100%, and you see an increase of sodium, which is different in the naive or resistant tumors, while the diffusion doesn't give much information. It's the same trend. So for phosphorus, and I'm going to go quickly. Phosphorus is a spin 1/2, so you have 2 energy levels, like the proton. But you can have many sources of signal, like for many metabolites, the ATP, the phosphocreatine, inorganic phosphate, and you can have chemical exchange between these metabolites. The relaxation is much longer than sodium, so you don't have to use UTE. So this is just an example of like a spectrum in the brain. You have the PCR, different like three types of ATP, and the PI, which are the main components. And the idea is to get the same, to get some information about the energy metabolism, like about the creatine kinase reaction, for example, in type 2 or aging in the muscle. So you can do a saturation, different type of like duration of saturation of 1 peak of the gamma ATP, and see what's happening to the PCR, and you can get some dynamic information here. You can do imaging too, using a turbospin echo, for example, and doing some saturation on the gamma ATP and suppressing the PCR, and you get the information of the inorganic phosphate, and you can localize it in different parts of the muscle to study this PI ATP reactions. You can do dynamic PCR imaging, for example, in muscle at 3T, when you acquire the PCR peak selectively with imaging, doing exercise and after, and you can see the recovery and you can get some information. The same in mitochondrial impairment or ATP production through oxidative phosphorylation in mitochondria. And we did some 70 brain, so either with a Floret ultra-short T sequence and a selective pulse, you can get some images of PCR or gamma ATP, or do a chemical shift imaging and select the peak you want to make an image to. And lastly, I just want to show some quick, now there's a lot of research in oxygen-17, which is a spin 5/2, so it's even more complicated than sodium. You're going to have 6 energy levels. And the source of signal is going to be water mainly, but also like a lot of molecules in like amino acid, protein, carbohydrate in the brain. So as in sodium, you're going to have electric quadrupolar moment. So the relaxation time is going to be very, very, very small. It's about a few milliseconds for the T1, which is good. We can do a lot of averages. And very short for the T2, so you're going to do ultra-short T sequences. And this, for oxygen, the goal would be to detect the cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen. So we follow these pathways in the energy metabolism in the cells. So if you have a decrease of oxygen, you're going to have a loss of ATP, like a decrease of production of ATP. And you can measure this water produced by the oxidative phosphorylation with oxygen-17. So it gives you some information about all this metabolic process. This is an example. Like when you do oxygen-17, you give your patient or volunteer some enriched oxygen-17 to inhale for like 10 minutes, and you do like dynamic acquisition. So you see an increase of the water signal from oxygen-17 in gray matter, white matter, and CSF. And if you have a model of your dynamics, you can get some information about you can quantify this metabolic rate of oxygen consumption, like in tumors or in a neurovascular disease. For example, if you have ischemia, you should have a decrease of this. So this is just some images to show you that potential applications like Alzheimer, Parkinson, ischemia, brain tumors. And you need ultra-short T, and you give your patients this oxygen enriched to inhale, and you see an increase of oxygen 17 in the brain. This is very low resolution, but still detectable. And this is just to show you, like, we're trying to do the same, but at 3T. This is natural abundance. We don't give anything to the patient. We use an ultra-short T sequence at 8 minutes and 8 millimeter resolution and 17 minutes acquisition. We can get some signal. Just to show you that some people have tried, I'm running out of time, so people have tried to do some chlorine too in the brain that can be related to sodium, so the salt in the brain. Potassium will be very interesting because can give some more information about the sodium-potassium pump. So if you can do sodium and potassium, can give you direct information of these pumps. Lithium isn't very interesting, but you have to give it to the patient with depression or bipolar disorder in general. And there's a lot of studies on hyperpolarized nuclei like helium and xenon to get information about the lung respiratory disease, or the carbon-13 to get some like pyruvate or lactate. People do it in vivo in humans now too. So the main limitation of X-nuclei NMR is the very low SNR, so we need low resolution. You have a lot of partial volume effect. If you want to do some quantification, that could be a problem. Long acquisition time, so it can be difficult to keep patients for like 1 hour in the scanner. Hardware, it's better to go to higher field, and you need some specific dual-tune coils. Software, for sodium or oxygen 17, you need ultra-short T sequences and a specific reconstruction algorithm. If you want to do some quantification, you need to do some specific sequences to suppress the signal you don't want to detect, like the extracellular fluid suppression, for example. And you need to take into account the relaxation times can change with pathologies that can impair your quantification. So the prospect is just we still need a lot of work to be able to use it in a clinic. So you need efficient dual-tune coils, like increase the acquisition, the rapidity. Reconstruction, you can use maybe some compressed sensing or iterative method, and data processing with some denoising and good biological models and simulations to be able to get like accurate quantification. And we need to find some killer applications. So I think therapy monitoring will be one of the main one. Just a summary, so the goal of X-nuclei MRI would be to have some complementary information to structural MRI with metabolic information, which should be non-invasive. And this information would be related to loss of homeostasis and cell integrity in many diseases and neurodegeneration, about the energy metabolism in muscle and brain, and tumor malignancy, and monitor therapy over time. I just want to thank you, everybody, for all my colleagues and everybody here. And I'll be happy to answer your questions at the end. Thank you.